Before I share some ideas with you, I'd like to thank some of you for having shared your credos with me. You remember last week we talked about credo, and several of you had been kind enough to share your beliefs, your credos with me. I'm very moved by some of what I've read, and I assure you, if you want to share your credo with me, I will certainly keep it confidential. You may notice that it's Father's Day, or at least the day on which we celebrate Father's Day, and the title of my sharing of ideas is Who is the Devil? Now, there are two possibilities you may imagine. One, that I am more eccentric than usual in having chosen such a title, which is always a possibility. The other is that I'm going to offer some deep psychological revelations about my relationship with my father, which is not true. I love my father. He was a remarkable man. But, it is from the point of view of my relationship with my dad that I want to move into my sharing of thoughts today. My father was an electrical engineer who worked for Radio Corporation of America. I don't know, as I said this morning earlier, who owns RCA, if anybody does. It seems to have kind of dropped from sight, but many years ago, it was, as some of you know, a very prominent company in the radio telecommunications field, or even before they had television. Dad was a sound engineer, and as I was growing up as a little boy, I often heard him referred to as the devil. Now, the reason for this, I discovered later, was because, like me, he was a very impatient man. Those of you who dabble in the stars, in astrology, may conclude that it was because he was a Sagittarian, as am I, that he was such an impatient man. Everything for Dad had to be done yesterday. And he had no patience with people who couldn't get things done as quickly as he. And so very often he was called upon to complete sound system installations for the company, for RCA, and they would always call up and say, "Send the old devil over." They sometimes called him Old Nick, although he wasn't called Nicholas. He works like the devil. And as a small child, having not been churched, my family were not affiliated with any church, which is one of the reasons I assume that I'm very eccentric. Pause there for laughter. Thank you. I had no idea, really, what the devil was supposed to be from that source, but I had several relatives, aunts and uncles, and they had no hesitation in telling me what the devil was. The devil was the personification of evil, a horned creature with a tail and hooves, very alarming to a child. Were they malicious, I wonder, or did they have my best interests at heart? Perhaps they were trying to keep me on the straight and narrow. Must one keep a 6 or 7-year-old child on the straight? Whence shall we stray? I don't know. It was later that I discovered about straying, but not that far. But the concept of the devil, as I say, was strange to me. And when I heard from those about me, not my parents, as I said, those about me, that the devil was a horned entity who was always on the lookout for my frailties and would hideously and remorselessly exploit them to the detriment of my eternal soul, I was a little bit puzzled, especially since I'd heard my dad so frequently referred to as a devil. Let me read to you from Scripture. This is from the Gospel of Matthew. And it has to do with one of the few references to the devil in the Bible. You won't find many references to the devil in the Old Testament, 3 or 4 at best. And the reason is that the Jewish people to whom Jesus belonged did not think of one devil, one personification of evil. They thought of lots of little mischievous devilettes, as it were. Jinns of the desert. These were the little mischievous entities that caused sickness, that caused the soup to boil over. They weren't the personification of evil that in later ages became the devil that was used to frighten the hell into us. But here's one reference in Matthew. Once again, the devil took Jesus to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in their glory. All these, he said, I will give you if you will only fall down and do me homage. The devil aspirated the age. But Jesus said, begone, Satan. Scripture says, you shall do homage to the Lord your God and worship him alone. Does this mean then, in Scripture, we find a reference to that one devil? Did a horned creature with tail and hooves and the inevitable trident, I'm not sure what the trident was meant to do. It's an ugly instrument, and I'm rather alarmed by it, but the devil seems to appear often enough with it in the illustrations that we see of him. He's a male, the devil is a man, just as God is, of course. Maybe it's... Never, we won't go there. So, what was this devil? Well, if you look at that passage, of course, it's rendered in English and the original in Greek, and if we imagine Jesus' language of Aramaic, we will find that the word Satan is there used. Satar, which is the Aramaic word that we translate as Satan, means, in a sense, the deceiver, that which deceives us. It doesn't have to be a physical representation. It doesn't have to be a super-terrestrial personality with horns and the whole shebang and the trident. It doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be that. What is happening in that notable passage, one of the most remarkable passages, I think, in the explanation of Jesus' earthly ministry, what is happening in that passage is that Jesus is being tempted by his own inner desires and imaginings. He could lead his people out of bondage. He could really stand up and defy the Roman occupying forces in Palestine. It had been tried before, and it was to be tried subsequently. Satar. His vanity is being appealed to. He's a great teacher. He's a great preacher. People follow him. Come on, guys, let's get... That must have been in his thinking. We know it was in his thinking because there were others who surrounded him, we know, who told him, rise up, be a King David, do your bit. How he must have been... He said, no. You remember he says, my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is not of this world. Thank you very much for the offer. Thank you very much, but that's enough. So that's not the devil with the horns and with the tail. That is a later invention. We find it growing in early Christianity in the 5th and 6th centuries. One of the reasons is because some of the early ascetics in the church, some of the individuals who wanted to disappear into the desert and practice an ascetic form of Christianity, needed something against which to fight. You can't just go into the desert and celebrate your virtues. You've got to have something to fight against. I mean, have you thought we could not celebrate our virtues without a teeny bit of vice? Let the devil represent vice, and our virtues shall shine. That was the reasoning. When I was still a little boy, I was taken to see the Abbey complex at Subiaco, which is south of Rome, southeast of Rome. It's actually a complex of rather beautiful churches surrounding an abbey, an ancient abbey. And the oldest of those buildings has a small chapel, a medieval chapel, built probably in the 13th century. And as you go into that chapel, you observe on your right-hand side a barred gate, like a prison cell door. And there is, in fact, a hollowed-out cave behind that door, that barred door that you can see through. And guess who is sitting in there? The devil. complete with the horns and the hooves, those little horns taken from that mischievous god Pan. I don't know whether he has a trident or not. But remember that by the time that devil was immured in there, actually a statue with a painted background, flames of hell, the notion of a literal personified power of evil had taken hold of the imaginations of all those people in Europe who were terrified of the possibilities of being seduced by the evil one. For at the end of that seduction lay what? The flames of hell. It is no wonder that the doctors of the church came up with the notion of an intermediary place before going to hell, because they themselves scared the hell out of themselves. Purgatory was a happy invention of the Middle Ages to save those who were terrified of the notion of going straight to hell. But the devil, at this point, becomes that horned, visible, and this is a highly pictorial and imaginative culture, remember, a highly visible, individualized force of evil. It's interesting that this should happen, and that it should have gained such a hold on the Western imagination in general. I know of no other civilization, I know of no other religion which has quite so individualized, personified, and humanized, in a sense, the forces of evil. They have anthropomorphized evil. I've talked to you about the anthropomorphization of God, the turning of God into a sort of super-terrestrial human being. Remember those two words, anthropos and morphe, from the Greek, in the shape of man. And here we have the devil, who is in the shape of man. We've anthropomorphized the devil in that way. Many other great religions, as I say, have not done that. They've had mischievous entities. The great Zoroastrian religion of Persia in ancient times, modern Iran. The great Zoroastrian religion had two great cosmic forces, Ahura and Acheman, the force of light and the force of darkness. But they were not personified. You didn't see them with little horns and a trident running around. You would have thought that as a result of the explorations and inquiries of men and women in the 19th and 20th centuries who looked into the human psyche, we would recognize that the forces of evil are released by we ourselves. We don't need a devil to tempt us to do wrong. We are perfectly capable of doing it ourselves. And yet still, this idea that there's this force, this cosmic force personified, anthropomorphized as the devil, is there, waiting to tempt us, take advantage of our weaknesses. Poor weak creatures that we are. Several years ago, I was living in one of the southern states on the mainland. I think it may have been Alabama. I'm not going to demonize one particular state. It was a southern state. And I had as a friend, as an acquaintance, a county prosecutor. And there was a particularly egregious case of murder that came up before the courts. Young man had brutally killed a friend. And my prosecutor acquaintance was quite sure that there would be a conviction. I'm not sure it was going to be first-degree murder, but it was a murder case of serious dimensions. And he went into court fairly confident, and this young guy's defense attorney came up with a great defense, which he knew would fly in that county. He said to the jurors, "My friends, the devil made my client kill his associate." Come on. It was booze and testosterone what done it. No. The jury actually accepted that contention. And they agreed that an external force of evil had driven this man to do this. He was a bright guy. And he got a sentence. He was convicted, but he got a very lenient sentence, 2 or 3 years in jail, whatever. The notion of an actualized force of evil is obviously often still present in our thinking. Unity says there is only one power and one presence in the universe and in my life. Now you can argue about the syntactical nature of this statement if you wish. Susan is here as our master grammarian to assist you with this. We say there is only one power and presence in our lives and in the universe, God the good, omnipotent. Mr. Fillmore, who was the co-founder of our movement, said, there is no devil, but there are thoughts, destructive thoughts, often thoughts that are dark, sometimes beyond imagining, that lurk in our hearts. And if we give those power, and if we use those to replace that vision of light and goodness in our lives, then the devil exists. And the devil is us. We are the devil. I know that sometimes I have looked into my heart, and maybe all of us have, and I've said to myself, my God, am I thinking these thoughts? Am I allowing myself to be provoked into the kind of aggressive response that they appear to demand? Am I that threatened? No. There may be people who suffer from some kind of remediable illness, mental or physical. That's a different matter, and they may entertain such thoughts. But apart from being a trifle eccentric, which you will grant, why else would I wear a wool sport coat in the middle of Honolulu in the summer? Well, that's my business, not yours. But and that's you know, that's a peccadillo, a little evil, a peccadillo. And so I say to myself, for heaven's sake, let's get back, let's get centered, let's accept some responsibility for the way we think, because that's what unity is. Unity invites us. Indeed, unity directs and almost commands us to take responsibility for our own thoughts. And that's not easy. Of course it's not. It's so much easier to say, the devil made me do it. Maybe there are mischievous spirits in the next world that influence us. It's possible. I don't know. I haven't been there lately. And I don't want to inhabit the realm that they may inhabit. But as for a personified force of evil, a figure dressed up, as we sometimes dress ourselves up, with horns and a tail and the trident. Heaven's sake, don't forget the trident. As for that, let's dismiss that as a vestige, a painful vestige of another age, a time when our spiritual understanding was less sophisticated. Let's open ourselves to the goodness of God and say whenever we think devilish thoughts, they have no business in consciousness. We are open and receptive to our good. And we can't blame the devil if we've done it. I'm finished and I'm done.